Hello, everyone. Here's another question for the yes or no treatment. It's about Joseph Stalin. And unsurprisingly, the question is, was Stalin good for Russia? Well, he was one of the giants of the 20th century. There's no question about that. And one about whom there are very few people who don't have a strong opinion, either very strongly against because of his brutality, or very strongly for because he was a man who brought respect to Russia and was very much a major factor in the defeat of Hitler during the Second World War. So there are strong views on both sides. Well, how did he get started? Well, he was born to a peasant family. His father was an alcoholic who beat him up from time to time, so I suppose that probably toughened him up. He certainly was a tough character. His mother decided that he should become a priest in the Georgian Orthodox Church, sent him off to seminary. Unsurprisingly as well, he didn't behave very well in seminary. He got more interested in reading the works of Karl Marx than in theology, and was kicked out of seminary. He quickly became involved in revolutionary activities, was noticed by Lenin, quickly became part of the Bolshevik party apparatus, and gradually rose after the Bolshevik Revolution to a position of prominence in the party until after Lenin's death. There was a 4 or 5 year struggle as to who would succeed him, the principal alternative candidate being Leon Trotsky. But Stalin eventually prevailed and became, in effect, the dictator of Russia in 1929, which he remained until his death in 1953. Of course, we know about many of things that Stalin accomplished. He certainly brought Russia into the modern industrial age. He had some big failures with the collectivization of agriculture. And then in the Second World War, he, of course, initially was involved in a mutual defense treaty with Hitler until Hitler betrayed him by invading Russia, and through some pretty brutal tactics involving his own people, managed to defeat the Germans in the Great Battle of Stalingrad, which is probably one of the principal turning points during the war. And so he's got to take a lot of credit, basically, for defeating Hitler. Of course, throughout his time as a dictator, he was brutal not only in his treatment of any common people who got in the way of any of his programs, but of his peers, of his colleagues on the Politburo, on the Central Committee of the Communist Party, and he had a policy of making sure he always had a majority of votes in the Central Committee and killed anybody who he thought would stand in the way of it. So, pretty tough character. In 1953, he died, probably of a result of alcoholic poisoning, and his successor, Nikita Khrushchev, immediately embarked a program of de-Stalinization, the cult figure of Stalin, and loosening up on some of his more oppressive policies. So, quite a character, and one that, again, as I said before, people are divided in their view of whether he was good or not. So let's start and take a look at those who say yes, he was good for Russia. Well, of course, most notably of all, as mentioned before, in the Second World War, he took on the Germans, and after not doing a good job of anticipating the invasion by Hitler, being woefully unprepared, he took charge, adopted defensive tactics, allowed Hitler to overrun Moscow, but then at Stalingrad, where his command to his army was not one step backward. And the Red Army took 1 million casualties in Stalingrad, in the Great Battle of Stalingrad, but that was a real turning point. And of course, as the German army retreated to return to Germany, they ran into the horrors of the Russian winter, and kind of the rest is history. It was certainly one of the big turning points of the Second World War. And Stalin, although his methods were brutal, has to take great credit for his role in that and the strong leadership that he provided. Number two, Stalin did drag Russia from a society of feudalism into the more modern industrial age. He certainly increased the industrial capacity, once again with great difficulty, many mistakes along the way, but by late in his incumbency, Russia was a far, far stronger country industrially. And of course, he also, along the same lines, managed to acquire by hook or by crook the ability to build nuclear weapons, and thus made Russia more or less impregnable. Certainly gave it a bargaining chip at any future table involving any sort of onslaught on Russia. So he did greatly increase Russia's strength, gave it a sense of pride for which many people in Russia still look back upon as a wonderful contribution to the heritage and stature of their nation. During the course of his time as dictator, he did bring great improvements in education and healthcare to the average Russian. So even though his tactics with respect to the Russian people was oftentimes very difficult and brutal, it wasn't all bad. He did improve their lot considerably. So there's basically the case for Stalin. He was obviously a very strong leader. He accomplished a lot at certainly great social costs, but for many people, he was what Russia needed at that time, and he delivered on it. Okay, well, what about those who say, no, he was not good for Russia? Well, the principal argument, of course, revolves around the brutality with which he treated his own people. The estimates are absolutely gigantic, perhaps in the tens of millions of people that died because of his policies or because of his insistence on cracking down on any form of dissent. He developed the system of the Gulag Archipelago, the forced labor camps. Great disagreement as to how many people died in them, but many were sent to there, maybe tens of millions. And of course, it was famously described in this monumental series of books by Alexander Solzhenitsyn called the Gulag Archipelago, which was for a time not allowed in Russia, and then it was eventually published in Russia, but became a bestseller in the West. So we know about the brutality of the way he treated people. Next, his performance in World War II, although he is much praised for his role in defeating Hitler, was initially pretty inept. He was woefully unprepared for Hitler's invasion, although he had been warned by his generals, he had been warned by the Americans and the British through their interception of codes and so forth that something like that was coming, and he simply wasn't ready. So while on the one hand he did eventually respond to the challenge, it was a pretty ignominious start, and for which he's received a lot of criticism. Next, although he did manage this industrialization of Russia, he also embarked upon a series of so-called 5-year plans, all of which describe the process of improvement that he plan for Russia, and where he insisted upon people towing the line when implementing it. And it most notoriously ran into great difficulty with the collectivization of farming, which worked not at all in the outset. Eventually it worked, but in the implementation of it, it was badly done, and a great famine occurred, and millions of people died of starvation as a result of the implementation of collectivization and the resistance of the peasant farmers who were simply not prepared to go along with it, who of course themselves were either killed or sent off to the gulag. So that was a real mess, and it was one that was badly handled and perhaps badly designed in the first place. And then finally, we must say that his great dream of a communist utopia for Russia, for the Soviet Union, was not only not achieved, but eventually collapsed. The fact that the country was actually dissolved is sort of the final repudiation of his vision for the nation, and we mustn't forget that. Okay, well, that's the case against Stalin, and it's a pretty strong one, I think. Well, what's my take on all of this? Well, I have to say that you've seen the arguments, you've heard the first of all the negatives about his brutality, which was unrivaled, and of course his principal accomplishment. I mean, he did improve the lot of the nation and hastened its development and emergence from feudalism and so forth. But his big accomplishment was in his role in the Second World War and the defeat of Hitler. So for that we have to take off our hats. But in effect, it was much like Mao Zedong, which is the whole notion of the end justifies the means. And both of these men were really brutal, sadistic murderers. So one has to say, gosh, is that always going to be the price of progress in situations such as the one that both Stalin and Mao found themselves in when they took over? And I suppose the other aspect of this is one of the great what-if questions. What if? What if Stalin had not been there at the time of the invasion of Russia by the Nazi Wehrmacht? Would somebody else have been as effective as Stalin was, or mightn't the invasion of Russia have succeeded? And who knows what would have happened not only to Russia and Germany, but to all of Europe had that invasion not been the failure that it was. So that what-if question is so enormous that it makes the question about whether he was good for Russia one that is just almost impossible to deal with. So on this one, I'm just going to abdicate. You decide for yourselves. Sorry about that. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, give me the like, subscribe, please, comment, hit the notification bell, and I'll see you with the next one. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.